Raya Bond, the notorious Mafia Boss, had crafted the perfect trap for his ex-wife, Patricia. He had sent the wedding invitation as a final, arrogant move, a public display of her disgrace as the poor woman he had discarded. He waited for her to arrive sad, alone, and humbled by his immense power. Raya's wedding went silent the moment the black rolls stopped. Not because the bride arrived, because the woman he'd thrown away stepped out, glowing, unbroken, and holding the hands of 3 little boys with his exact face. The Mafia Boss who bragged he controlled everything suddenly couldn't control a single breath. And as the guests turned, whispering, Patricia lifted her chin because today wasn't his coronation. It was the day his darkest secret walked straight down his aisle. So tell me, what does a man like Raya Bond do when his ex-wife crashes his wedding with 3 heirs he never knew existed? If you want to know how she kept this secret hidden from a ruthless crime boss for 4 years, hit that subscribe button right now. To understand the silence, we have to go back 7 years. Back to the toxic mansion, the night Patricia was called a curse, and the moment the Mafia Boss thought he had thrown her away forever. The midnight chill of the East Coast settled over Raya Bond's sprawling, sterile mansion in the exclusive suburbs. Raya, the Mafia Boss, was already gone, leaving behind only the cold promise of his legal team and the echo of his voice declaring Patricia irrelevant. The house was a monument to his power, and her escape had to be swift, silent, and surgical. Patricia did not wait for the sun, the divorce papers, or the security detail assigned to oversee her eviction. She moved with a desperate, quiet grace, clutching a single canvas duffel bag. Inside were not gowns or jewels, but the vital artifacts of her true identity: a birth certificate, an expired driver's license, and, crucially, a decades-old deed to a small, nearly worthless property in the American South, left to her by an aunt. Raya had never bothered to check what little she claimed to own. His contempt had been her best shield. He had stripped her of everything: material, cars, accounts, social standing, but the 7 years of silent suffering had tempered her. The tears were done. Now, there was only a cold, laser-focused resolve. Survival, far away from the dark shadow of Raya's empire. She slipped out the back gate just as the first commuter trains rattled by, heading toward the city's financial district. She caught a series of buses and long-haul connections, trading the dizzying, high-stakes glamour of the metropolis for the deep, isolated anonymity of the country. Her destination was a small, secluded town in rural Alabama, a place so removed from the modern world that Raya's influence would struggle to breathe there. She settled into a tiny, efficiency apartment above a local hardware store, the rent depleting the last $300 of cash she had squirreled away over the years. The transition was a physical shock. The woman who once spent afternoons at private clubs now stood in line at the laundromat. She ate simple, budget-conscious meals, her diet a testament to her financial hardship, but the solitude was priceless. Here, she was anonymous, just Patricia, a quiet woman starting fresh. The inheritance land was too remote to access immediately, so her first priority was immediate income. Patricia leaned on the only real skill she possessed that wasn't tied to Raya's toxic wealth: her passion for baking. It was a skill Raya had always mocked, calling it domestic folly. She bought flour and sugar in small batches, and began creating intricate, comforting pastries in the apartment's cramped kitchen. The landlord, a kind elderly woman, let her use a display shelf in the hardware store's front window. It was grueling, humbling work far beneath the standard of the mafia wife she had been, but every dollar earned felt like a magnificent defiance, a nail hammered into the coffin of Raya's control. One cold afternoon, counting the coins in her apron pocket, Patricia looked at her hands. They were raw from the detergent and dusted with flour, but they were strong. Raya had defined her worth by his name, his money, and her perceived inability to produce an heir. But here, in this forgotten corner of America, she was defining herself by effort, dignity, and a simple, honest profit. Raya Bond's shadow was vast, but she had finally walked out of it. She was alone and financially stretched, yet she felt the fragile, exhilarating warmth of true independence. The quiet rhythm of Patricia's new life, the endless cycle of mixing batter, kneading dough, and trekking to the town square, was suddenly interrupted by a profound, subtle weakness. It began as a strange dizziness while pulling hot trays from the oven, a persistent wave of nausea that the simple country air could not dispel, and an overwhelming fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. She initially dismissed it as exhaustion from the relentless physical labor, a harsh reality of her new, humble existence. But one morning, leaning against the counter, her mind traveled back to the years she had spent praying in vain within Rhea's gilded cage. The despair of that barren chapter had left an indelible mark. But now, a small, undeniable awareness began to bloom in the silence. It was impossible, illogical, yet the quiet conviction settled deep in her heart. Using the precious savings from her pastry sales, she made a covert trip to the county clinic, a tiny brick building far enough from her hardware store apartment that no local busybody would recognize her. The moment the kind, middle-aged nurse confirmed it, a single, affirmative nod, Patricia felt the world tilt. It wasn't joy that hit her first, but a cold, paralyzing wave of dread. A child, the very blessing she had been denied, the very reason Rhea had branded her a curse and cast her out, was now growing inside her. The irony was exquisite, but the danger was immediate. If Rhea Bond, the man obsessed with legacy and control, ever discovered this proof of her fertility and the fact that he was the father, he would not hesitate to claim the child, drawing her back into the vortex of his toxic power. This blessing, she realized, had to be the best-kept secret of her life. She made an appointment for an ultrasound under a false name, counting the days in nervous anticipation. 2 weeks later, she lay on a cold examination table, staring at the blurry grayscale image on the screen. The doctor, a gentle, older man with a bemused expression, adjusted the transducer. "Well, Patricia," he said, pulling off his gloves, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "You certainly kept this quiet. Are you ready for some slightly overwhelming news?" She gripped the sheet, bracing herself. "Just tell me, doctor." He pointed to the screen with a pen, tracing 3 distinct shapes. "You're not having one. You're having 3. 3 perfectly healthy, very active babies." The world dissolved into a rush of sound, the rhythmic beat of the monitor, the doctor's muffled words, the frantic drumming of her own heart. Triplets. Imagine the fear, the sudden weight of protecting 3 lives alone. If you've ever had to fight for your future, hit the like button for Patricia's new mission. A profound, overwhelming, almost biblical answer to the shame Rhea had heaped upon her, but the joy was immediately swallowed by the colossal fear of protecting them. 3 faces, 3 destinies, 3 chances for Rhea to identify them and snatch them away. The boys would bear his features, carry his powerful genetic imprint. She looked down at her still flat abdomen, a new, fierce resolve hardening her gaze. She was no longer just Patricia, the disgraced ex-wife. She was a mother, guarding 3 lives against a mafia boss. She would hide them, raise them in the shadow, and never let Rhea Bond suspect the magnificent, triple blessing he had inadvertently left behind. This secret was her burden and her ultimate strength. Patricia's world had become a high-stakes calculus of survival. She was pregnant with triplets, financially strapped, and terrified that Rhea would discover the truth. Every extra pastry she baked, every dollar she saved, was not for comfort, but for the safety fund of the 3 lives growing within her. The quiet resolve that had defined her escape was now strained by the overwhelming reality of preparing for 3 newborns alone. One Tuesday morning, as she walked home from the market, she found a letter waiting for her at the hardware store's counter, a thick, official envelope bearing the seal of an established New York law firm. Her heart seized. She immediately feared it was Rhea's legal team, somehow having tracked her down. She tore it open with trembling hands. It wasn't a threat, it was a miracle. The letter explained that a distant cousin of her mother, a kind, eccentric woman Patricia had only met once as a child, had passed away. Unbeknownst to Patricia, the cousin, who had no direct heirs, had appointed her the sole beneficiary of her estate. The estate was substantial, accumulated over decades of shrewd, clean investments. A multi-million-dollar fortune, free of any connection to Rhea's dirty money or mafia world. Patricia read the final tally twice, then thrice, sinking onto the floor of the tiny apartment. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was insulation. It was a thick, impenetrable wall between her precious boys and the reach of their father. She wouldn't have to raise them in fear, scrounging for change, worrying that a moment of weakness would expose them. Within weeks, operating with the cold, meticulous efficiency that her survival demanded, Patricia executed the plan. She retained a lawyer in a distant city who knew nothing of her past or her current pregnancy. She liquidated her grandmother's land, making it look like a quiet, final sale of her last asset. The money was routed through clean, anonymous trusts. She didn't buy a mansion or a sports car. Her priority was stealth and security. She purchased a small, fortified house on the coast, far from both Raya's initial territory and the quiet town that had protected her. It was inconspicuous from the outside, but inside, it was a sanctuary, secured with state-of-the-art surveillance and discreet guards hired through the lawyer's clean network. Patricia moved silently, vanishing from the hardware store one night as if she were a ghost, leaving no forwarding address. She settled into her new, isolated life of secret luxury, a mother preparing for her triplets. The money was merely a tool. The true inheritance was the ability to raise her sons in safety, shielded by wealth that Raya Bond could neither touch nor trace. The disgraced, poor ex-wife was gone, replaced by a wealthy, powerful mother, operating in the shadows. Years dissolved into the salty air of Patricia's coastal sanctuary. 4 years, marked not by seasons or holidays, but by the rapidly growing shadows of her 3 beautiful boys, 3 miniature versions of Raya Bond, yet completely sheltered from his name and his violence. They were the world's most magnificent, dangerous secret. Patricia had built a life of serene normalcy for them, a quiet routine of homeschooling, protected coastal walks, and bedtime stories, all financed by the clean inheritance that served as their fortress wall. Raya Bond, meanwhile, had continued his reign in the city, his power unchallenged, his image carefully cultivated. The divorce had been a brief, easily dismissed scandal, quickly overshadowed by his ever-expanding empire. Yet, he still carried the quiet, festering resentment of Patricia's silent escape. He had never found her, and that failure was a small, irritating stain on his record of total control. Now, Raya was preparing for his biggest move yet, a spectacular, televised wedding to the daughter of a powerful, rival family. It was less a marriage and more a merger, a union that would solidify his status in both the criminal and legitimate financial worlds. The guest list was a calculated roster of the nation's elite, every detail screaming of unassailable wealth and power. As the wedding approached, Raya found himself staring at the seating chart, the old, venomous impulse returning. He needed to prove his victory, not just to the world, but to the ghost of the woman he had discarded. He wanted her to witness his new life, his new, more suitable wife, and her own crushing defeat. He wanted to look down and see the poor, broken ex-wife sitting in the front row, a visible testament to his success. Raya's team managed to locate her old, dormant P.O. box address from the defunct corporation she once registered. It was a long shot, but driven by ego, he selected the most ostentatious, gold-embossed invitation, a ticket to the most exclusive event of the year, and mailed it, knowing it would eventually be forwarded. The message was simple. I am celebrating my triumph. Your presence is required for my enjoyment. Weeks later, the invitation arrived at Patricia's fortified house, delivered not by the general post, but by a discreet courier service. She found the thick, heavy envelope sitting innocently on her mahogany entry table, an island of obscene gold and white gloss in her quiet, muted home. Patricia picked it up, the cardstock feeling cold and heavy in her hand. She recognized the scent of the expensive paper, the ornate calligraphy. Her name, Mrs. Patricia Bond, nay, was scrawled at the bottom. A bitter, involuntary laugh escaped her lips. Raya had ensured she was invited to her own funeral. She carried the invitation into the living room, where her 3 sons, Leo, Alex, and Marcus, with their father's dark eyes and sharp, intelligent expressions, were building a fortress of colorful blocks. They looked up, their faces beaming. Patricia looked from the cold, golden invitation in her hand to the 3 miracles playing at her feet. She hadn't just survived Raya's attempt to erase her. She had thrived in secret. The humiliation Raya intended was impossible. The card was no longer a symbol of her disgrace. It was an invitation to the stage. And Patricia, the woman who had spent 4 years in the shadows, finally had a reason to step back into the light. For 3 days, the gold-embossed invitation sat on Patricia's desk, a malignant piece of art against the calm backdrop of her life. She found herself revisiting the darkest corners of her memory. The sound of Raya's voice calling her a curse, the feel of his disdain, and the humiliation of being cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back. That pain had forged her survival, but now, it demanded vindication. Raya wanted her to sit in the front row, a visible monument to his victory. But Patricia realized the invitation was not a humiliation. It was a weapon handed directly to her. He had given her a ticket to the stage of his most important public spectacle. She could choose to be the disgraced ex-wife, or she could choose to be the ghost that shatters his reality. Her decision crystallized while watching her three sons play. Leo, Alex, and Marcus, with their confident strides and their father's exact facial structure, were the definitive proof of Raya's lie, the lie that he was potent and powerful, and she was merely barren. Their existence was the truth Raya was most desperate to hide. Patricia sat down with her trusted lawyer, the one who knew the truth but was paid for his absolute discretion, and began constructing the plan. She wasn't seeking revenge or a legal claim. She wanted closure and a final, undeniable statement of her peace and independence. The goal was to walk in, show Raya what he had lost, expose his deceit to the most influential people in the country, and walk out, never looking back. The first step was transportation. She needed to arrive in a manner that instantly erased any memory of the poor ex-wife. Through her financial network, she arranged the rental of a pristine black Rolls-Royce Ghost, complete with a professional, intimidating driver. It had to be a statement of effortless, untouchable wealth. The second step was the visual statement. Raya's world was defined by muted power dark suits, deep reds, and cold stone. Patricia needed contrast. She needed to be the sun breaking the storm. She revisited the vision that had kept her going all these years. A bright, triumphant color. She commissioned a designer to create 3 bespoke children's suits and 1 breathtaking dress in a vivid, electrifying yellow. The color, the very shade of life and success, would not only capture every camera lens, but would also directly contrast the black and white spectacle of the wedding, transforming her from a mourning widow of the marriage into a queen celebrating her freedom. She looked at her reflection, no longer the timid woman from 7 years ago. The plan was executed, not in anger, but with the cold, precise confidence of a woman who knew the exact value of the secret she was carrying. The Mafia Boss invited her to his shame, but Patricia was coming to close the curtain on his old life. She was ready to introduce the world to the 3 sons Raya had abandoned. The wedding day dawned bright and unnervingly quiet at Patricia's house. There was a sense of profound ritual in the air, not unlike preparing for a battle or a coronation. Patricia stood before the mirror, the vibrant yellow silk dress settling over her frame. It was more than a dress. It was armor, a final, public declaration of the life Raya had tried to destroy. The color, so bold and uncompromising, was a visual echo of her transformation. She looked down at her 3 sons. Leo, Alex, and Marcus, now 4 years old, were dressed in miniature versions of the same striking yellow, their dark, inherited eyes wide with excitement. They looked like 3 little suns, radiating innocent, devastating power. "Are we going to a big party, Mommy?" Marcus whispered, trying to smooth down his silk collar. Patricia knelt, drawing them close. She looked into their faces. Raya's face, softened and filled with pure, uncorrupted light. "We are going to an event, my loves, and we are going to show everyone how beautiful and happy we are." She smoothed Alex's hair. "Remember what we practiced. Hold my hands, walk straight, and smile. We are celebrating our freedom today." The rented Rolls-Royce, a silent, menacing black behemoth, pulled up the long, fortified drive. As Patricia settled the boys into the expansive back seat, she gave the driver the final instruction. The exact time of arrival, precisely when the officiant would ask for objections. The journey began in silence, only broken by the soft, excited chatter of the triplets, marveling at the car's luxurious interior. Patricia leaned back against the plush leather, using the long drive to perform her final, mental exorcism. This was not an act of revenge. Revenge was messy, reactive, and kept her tethered to Raya's darkness. This was closure. This was a statement. Raya had believed her weakness was her greatest curse. She was about to show him that her strength, the 3 lives she had protected, was her ultimate blessing. She thought of the rage that would contort Raya's face, the humiliation that would seize his new bride, the scandal that would rock his perfectly constructed public life. She allowed the thought to linger, not with malice, but with a detached sense of justice. He was about to reap the consequences of his arrogance. As the car drew closer to the city, the landscape outside the tinted windows changed from quiet country lanes to glittering, high-rise buildings. The tension in the air thickened. They passed checkpoints manned by men in dark suits, Raya's security, oblivious that the greatest threat to their boss was riding calmly in the luxury car they waved through. The final turn brought them onto the grand boulevard leading to the venue, a magnificent, glass and steel cathedral of wealth. The entire street was a spectacle of luxury vehicles, flashing cameras, and well-dressed elites. Patricia took a deep, steadying breath. Her fingers clasped loosely around the hands of Leo and Alex, with Marcus nestled between them. She looked at their beautiful, innocent faces one last time. "Ready, my kings?" she murmured. "Ready, Mommy," Leo declared, his voice firm. The Rolls-Royce slowed to a whisper, gliding past the confused security personnel and stopping precisely at the main entrance, pulling focus from the white aisle where the bride and groom were surely exchanging their fatal promises. The moment had arrived. Patricia smiled, a slow, serene, and utterly ruthless expression of a woman finally claiming her peace. The moment the Rolls-Royce's engine fell silent, the massive glass doors of the venue seemed to inhale the sound of the entire wedding party. Inside, under the glittering chandeliers, Raya Bond and his beautiful, wealthy fiancé stood before the officiant, deep in the exchange of vows. Raya's posture was rigid with pride, his eyes scanning the front rows for any sign of dissent or, ideally, Patricia's broken face. The driver, a silent professional, opened the rear door. The flashbulbs erupted, the sudden, violent burst of light and sound, amplified by the high ceilings of the cathedral, sliced through the reverent silence of the ceremony. Photographers, trained to capture the glamorous bride, instinctively turned toward the shocking interruption, the black luxury car, and the first sight of the vibrant yellow that clashed so loudly with the wedding's monochrome elegance. Patricia stepped out, poised and magnificent. Every head in the hall turned. Raya, halfway through reciting his devotion, faltered. He scanned the growing commotion at the door, annoyance instantly curdling into disbelief. He recognized the shape of her face, the way she carried her height. But the woman in the flawless yellow dress was too serene, too commanding to be the pathetic figure he had imagined. His eyes narrowed, searching for the telltale sign of poverty he expected. And then, Patricia made her statement. She took a step, and the three boys, Leo, Alex, and Marcus, stepped with her, their hands securely locked in hers. The three of them, in their matching, brilliant yellow suits, were an absolute spectacle. Raya's world stopped. He didn't see three children. He saw three living copies of his younger self. The unmistakable shape of his jaw, the severe intelligence in their dark eyes, the precise curve of their hairline, the triple punch of genetic evidence hit him like a physical blow. The confident facade Raya had spent a decade building shattered instantly. His face contorted, a horrifying mask of pure visceral panic and denial. His lips moved, but no sound escaped. The current bride, standing beside him, was initially confused by the delay, but when she followed Raya's frantic, desperate gaze, she saw them. She saw Patricia's calm, powerful smile, and then she saw the boys. Being smart, she didn't need a DNA test. She saw the fear in Raya's eyes, and she understood. This wasn't just an ex-wife. This was the secret, the massive, unspoken lie that exposed Raya as a deceiver and a reckless man. A man who clearly prioritized image over honesty, and who had three powerful heirs he chose to abandon. The bride's own face hardened, moving from confusion to cold, controlled fury. She looked directly at Raya, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room like broken glass. "Stop the wedding," she commanded, her voice ringing out. The officiant froze. Raya managed to croak. "Sweetheart, it's nothing. She's nobody." The bride cut him off, staring not at Patricia, but at the face of the man she was about to marry. "I am marrying a man who tells the truth. I will not stand at this altar with a man who has 3 secret sons, 3 whole lives, that he denied and tried to hide. You risked our alliance, you lied to me, and you were willing to disgrace the mother of your children just to inflate your own ego." She turned to the crowd, her expensive bouquet dropping to the floor with a soft thud. "This wedding is over." As the room erupted into chaos, gasps, murmurs, and the renewed clicking of cameras, Patricia stood perfectly still. The mission was complete. The 3 boys, unaware of the devastation they caused, simply held their mother's hands, their attention now on the fallen flowers. Patricia gave Raya one last, lingering look of absolute, serene pity, then calmly turned and led her 3 sons out, leaving the Mafia Boss humiliated and alone at his own ruined altar. That was the most satisfying entrance ever. If you feel like Patricia finally got the justice she deserved, share this video right now, and join our community of epic story lovers. The same Rolls-Royce that had carried Patricia to the site of the disruption now carried her away from the scene of the collapse. Inside the opulent, silent cabin, the chaos of the wedding hall was already fading, replaced by the quiet, contented murmur of the triplets. They were busy examining the yellow petals they had collected from the discarded bridal bouquet, oblivious to the seismic shock their simple presence had caused. Patricia leaned her head back, allowing a long, slow breath to escape her lungs. It was over. The years of fear, the silence, the stigma of the poor, barren ex-wife, all obliterated by a 4-minute spectacle and the testimony of 3 tiny witnesses. There was no exhilaration, only an immense, profound sense of peace. She had not come seeking revenge. She had come seeking finality. She had proven to Raya, to the world, and most importantly, to herself, that she was whole, potent, and powerful on her own terms. Back at the ruined altar, Raya Bond stood motionless, a statue carved from disbelief and public disgrace. The crowd, the press, and the nervous security guards were a swirling vortex around him, but he saw only the receding image of Patricia, draped in triumphant yellow, flanked by his heirs. The most powerful man in the room was revealed to be a desperate, pathetic fraud whose ego had been his downfall. His fiancée, whose family alliance was key to his legitimacy, was gone. The headlines the following morning would not focus on his merger, but on his monumental, triple shame. Raya tried to regain control, shouting orders into his headset, but the damage was irreversible. He had lost his bride, his public narrative, and, most damningly, the moral authority he used to manipulate others. He knew, with a sinking horror that clawed at his mafia boss pride, that he would never be able to reclaim those boys. Patricia's wealth was clean, her life was hidden, and his only claim lay in the toxic environment from which she had successfully extracted them. As the Rolls-Royce reached the safety of the highway, Patricia looked out at the glittering city that had once held her captive. She didn't feel the need to gloat over Raya's ruin. Her victory was personal and internal. Her toxic marriage had ended in disgrace, but her life had blossomed in privacy. She had moved from being a woman defined by what she lacked: a child, money, status, to a mother defined by abundance. 3 sons, secure wealth, and undeniable dignity. She smiled at her boys. They were safe. She was free. The mafia boss was left in the wreckage of his own pride, while Patricia, the quiet survivor, simply drove toward the peaceful future she had fought so hard to create. Thank you for watching to the end. I believe you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting stories like this lined up for you already, so click the image showing on your screen to watch the next. Don't forget to subscribe.